All right, what's up, guys? We got UFC Fight Night on August 2nd, the most anticipated fight card of this entire year yet. And guess what, guys? It took until today, which is Wednesday, for the UFC to officially update their goddamn website. But without further ado, I am going to dive into my entire preview or fight predictions for UFC Fight Night that's happening on August 2nd. 2025. Thank you guys for tuning into Fight Feed. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. And also, please give this a like if you enjoy. Please also comment who you guys are picking in this fight card. You know, as MMA Joey would say, the dogs are barking on this one. We got the dogs barking again. Guys, I have been having a really hard time with this fight card, wrestling back and forth, trying to figure out who to pick in each fight. You guys will see what I wrestled with as we go through this. Now, getting back to somewhat of my old ways, I want to, instead of just giving you guys all my picks in the upfront, what I'll do though, I will skip the foreplay building up to my pick. I'll just let you guys know this time straight up who I am picking, and then allow you to kind of see where I came from to come to that decision by digging into the tail of the tape, the styles, the momentum check, the intangibles. But without further ado, let's dive into this fight card happening this Saturday. The first fight on the card, we've got Ketlen Souza versus Piera Rodriguez. And in this fight, guys, I'm going Piera Rodriguez. Now, diving into the tail of the tape for this matchup, we've got Ketlen Souza, who's 29, 5'3" with a 63-inch reach, 15-5 professional record, 2-2 in the UFC. Piera Rodriguez, on the other hand, 32 years old, 5'3" as well, with a 63.5-inch reach, 10-2 overall professional record with a 3-2 record in the UFC. Taking a look at the styles for this fight. So Ketlen Souza has a good mix of skills with striking and subs on her record. She has decent power on the feet as well. Went back to watch her fight in the Sphere where she dropped Hurricane, and then actually right after dropping her with that, I think it was a lead hook. And also, Souza throws like Amanda Hebos. Fucking Amanda Hebos? I'm sorry, guys. Clearly lack of sleep. She throws like Jessica Andrade, not Amanda Hebos. She does like the elbows to the hips and just winging the hooks, similar to a Chris Cyborg as well. Now, she caught Hurricane with that, and I might be butchering her last name, so apologies, but she dropped her, and like what was really more impactful for me and like it left a lasting impression was not only that she dropped her with that power, but the way she cinched up that rear naked choke immediately after hurting Hurricane in the Sphere. So some things to think about in terms of her strengths. Some of her weaknesses, though, is that I feel like she's easily caught on the feet. She doesn't have the best striking defense. She's not moving her head very often, kind of getting pieced up. And before Hurricane actually got tagged by Souza, I believe, was losing that fight, was getting pieced up with several different combinations on the side of Hurricane. So Souza does have that one-hitter quitter that could change the outcome of a fight where she's actually losing. So keep that in mind. Now, looking at Piera Rodriguez, on the other hand, very strong KO power on her side with 50% of her wins by KO. That is a decent stat, especially when you're looking at these women being straw weights, 115 pounds. Also, I would say what I like from Rodriguez in kind of watching tape on her is her great lateral footwork, very good at moving side to side, isn't stuck in one place, isn't moving straight forward and back, is constantly on the lateral movement, which allows her to cut angles and set up different combinations. What I would say is that some weaknesses for Piera Rodriguez, although she's never been finished from what I can see, she can easily be frustrated. And actually what we know by that is her only loss in the UFC came by in a fight where she was winning, I believe, but especially on the feet, but was getting frustrated and then ultimately ended up headbutting her opponent and getting DQ'd. So keep that in mind as you look at this fight. Looking at their momentum, so we've got Ketlen Souza coming off of a loss. She last fought just after Valentine's Day on February 15th against Angela Hill, and she lost that fight. Prior to that, she got the win over Harlequin and then a win over Man and a loss to Silva before that. Then looking at Piera Rodriguez, 1 win streak for her. She last fought, I believe it actually is 12-14-24, not 12-12. Sorry, guys. Now, she did have a win over Knutson, who's actually decent. And I feel like that is a pretty highly rated win, at least in my book. Now, she had a loss to Cornolle before that. Now, her loss to Cornolle was the one where she was winning and got DQ'd. So keep that in mind. Before that, a loss to Jillian Robertson, who's obviously a very highly talented grappler with submissions. And then a win over Sam Hughes before that. Sam Hughes, I think, is one of those fighters that she's like the Christian Rodriguez, the flyweight division, not flyweight, a strawweight division, knocking prospects off when she has to type of thing. Jumping into the intangibles and X factors for this fight. So neither woman is the home fighter. Looking at Ketlen Souza, I would say she definitely needs a win. She's coming off of that loss earlier this year to Angela Hill. I would say for her, some red flags is just that she's easily tagged on the feet, very low guard, does not have good striking defense. Now, on the side of Piera Rodriguez, also not the home fighter, not too much pressure for her because she is coming in here with a win, but I think she's going to want to keep building off of that win and maybe put together a bit of a streak. Now, grappling might be an issue for Piera Rodriguez in the sense that if Souza obviously has a deeper bag from a grappling perspective, that could be a problem. But Piera Rodriguez doesn't have too many red flags in the grappling department. Really just called it out because I've seen that, she does have good wrestling, good takedowns, but doesn't necessarily always find those ways to finish the fight on the ground, if you know what I mean. So, as I mentioned, guys, I've already told you the pick, Piera Rodriguez, so I can give you a little bit more information on why I chose Piera Rodriguez for this fight. Really, I just think her footwork and her more technical striking skill is going to be the outlier here. I see this one going to decision, a 3 out of 5 confidence overall. And guys, as I'm going through this, trying to make this one a lot quicker for you guys. So let's just keep this momentum moving here. We've got Rafael Esteban versus Felipe Bunes. I am picking for this matchup is going to be Rafael Esteban. We'll go ahead and dive into the details now. Now, everyone knows Felipe Bunes was supposed to fight Andrey Lima. He pulled out of the fight, but he pulled out of the fight about a month ago. So this is not as short notice as a lot have been making it out to be. So just keep that in mind. But looking at these two guys, Rafael Esteban, 28 years old, 5'8" with 69-inch reach. 13-0 record, a 2-0 record in the UFC. Felipe Bunes, on the other hand, 35, 5'8", 69-inch reach, 14-7 overall record. So he's a 50-50, 2-1 record in the UFC. All right, jumping into these gentlemen's styles, we've got Esteban, where I've got some stats here for you. 31% of his wins are by knockout, 46% of his wins are by decision. Esteban showed some good grappling defense in his last fight, which is a great thing to call out here because he will have a little bit of that threat on the side of Bunes. Some weaknesses is that I just don't think Esteban always pulls together or strings together all of his tool bag to get wins. I feel like in some cases he has gone a more, I guess you could say, safe route by taking his opponents down and just really laying on top of him. Gas tank hasn't always been there. In his fight against Charles Johnson, it seemed like he withered, closer to the end of the fight, which tends to be the way Charles Johnson fights, where it's like he builds into fights and his opponents tend to kind of fall off. And that's where you start to see those issues, like where actually Josh Van, was finished by Charles Johnson that way. Now, Felipe Bunes, looking at him, some strengths for him is really calling out his wins by sub. He has 64% of his wins by submission. What I would say in terms of weaknesses is he's just really not the best striker. He's definitely going to be more of a grappling heavy approach, trying to put up those submissions and get his opponent out of there in that regard. Jumping into the momentum check for these gentlemen. So looking at Rafael Esteban, a lot more momentum here. 13-fight win streak. He's 13-0 and undefeated. He last fought on February 15, 2025, got a win over Aguilar. Before that, a win over Johnson, and then a win over Elias, and a win over Estevez. Felipe Bunes, on the other hand, 1-fight win streak. He last fought in January of this year, so January 11, 2025. He has a win over Jose Johnson, the tall, 6-foot flyweight, a loss to Josh Van prior to that, and a win over Horiuchi, and a win over Cruz before that. And it's not Dominic Cruz, it's some other random Cruz. Jumping into the intangibles and X factors. So neither of these fighters are home fighters here. What I would say is that Esteban has a lot more pressure because he's undefeated. He's going to want to savor that undefeated record and not give it up. And so because of that, I think he has a lot more pressure than Boons. Boons took this replacement opponent on short notice, so really nothing to write home about on his side of things. Some red flags I called out for Esteban. He's been caught in subs before, but was able to get himself out of there. So that is something I just wanted to call out because it's not like he has had this super clean approach to where he's never even been in trouble from a submission perspective. It is nice to see that he's been able to be put in those precarious positions and find a way out. So what I would say is the final variable is Esteban's coming in on short notice, but not as short as some others, like for instance, John Yannis on this card, or not Yannis. It might be John Yannis that's coming in short notice against Bashi, but then also you have Hyun Sung Park coming in on short notice, which only about a week's notice in the main event. So not as short as these guys. I believe they reported that his opponent, Andrey Lima, Felipe Boon's opponent, original opponent, was out on July 4th. And so that gave Esteban, obviously, since then to today to work his way into this fight. So he's got a little bit more time than most. And jumping into my pick, which I've already given to you guys, I've chosen Rafael Esteban. Now, I'm not extremely confident, guys, in this pick because, as you've seen the last couple of weeks, UFC's had a very odd situation where we're seeing a lot of these huge underdogs come in with the big W's. And so I feel like this is a recipe for disaster. We could hear Laura Sanko go, oh my God. I don't know if Laura Sanko's actually on the commentary this weekend, but she might be. So we shall see. And shout out to Laura Sanko. I do actually think she is a student of the game. I do like some of her takes. It is kind of funny when she's like screaming though, because it's not the same as like DC or John Anik. But anyways, getting into it, I really have picked Esteban solely off of, I feel he's just had a better strength of schedule, better opponents, and he's done better against certain opponents as well. I do think that this fight's going to decision, and I'm pretty confident that he'll get that done. Not very confident he'll finish his opponent here. Definitely thinking it's a decision, and my confidence level is 4 out of 5. The next fight, we've got Austin Bashi versus John Yannis. My pick for this fight is Austin Bashi. I was wrestling around with the idea of John Yannis going out there and actually maybe being able to catch Austin Bashi with some strikes, maybe putting him out. But I feel like when I look at their strength of schedule, I just feel like Austin Bashi, although he's much younger, has the better strength of schedule. He's proven more against opponents who have very solid records compared to that of John Yannis. Now, like I said, Yannis could go out there and surprise all of us, but I do think Austin Bashi is going to get it done come Saturday night. John Yannis currently has the locked character picture because, the UFC doesn't put pictures up probably until after the fight. So you guys have to deal with that for now. But outside of that, Austin Bashi's 23 years old, 5'6" with a 70-inch reach in the featherweight division. 13-1 in the UFC, 13-1 in his overall professional record, and 0-1 in the UFC because we don't count Contender Series. Jumping over to John Yannis, he is 31 years old, 5'8" tall. His reach is unfortunately not showing on Tapology, which is where I go, where a lot of us creators go. John Yannis also, if you go and watch some of his fights, like I did, he is 5'7" in his actual listed fight before he got into some of his fights. So can't take 5'8" for as the scripture, if you will, but we'll just keep it as it is. We'll say Tapology's right on that. Now, John Yannis, 9-3 professional record, 0-0 in the UFC because he's debuting this weekend. Looking at the styles for Austin Bashi versus John Yannis. Austin Bashi is obviously still very young, has a very strong grappling heavy approach with a lot of submission threats when he's on the ground. 38% of his wins are by submission, and then 38% of his wins are by decision. So generally speaking, from a stat standpoint, Austin Bashi's either getting that sub or he's winning a fight by having that top control and getting a decision. generally not getting a lot of KOs. He has only a few, maybe 1 or 2 on his overall record. Some weaknesses I have for Austin Bashi is he had a poor performance in his last outing. Now, he did go up against the prospect killer in Christian Rodriguez, who's knocked off a lot of prospects in the UFC. Cameron Simon's the only one that I can think of right now, but there's been other prospects. I don't know why I can't think of their names at this current moment. So, well, obviously Austin Bashi's one of them now too. I think what worried me about that is if you guys watch that fight, Christian Rodriguez had a great game plan. He was like forward pressure on the gas from the start, throwing punches, landing shots immediately, and making those shots sting Bashi, which I believe is very telling because Bashi, I think, was kind of like on the back foot and unable to deal with that pressure, in my opinion. I think that Christian Rodriguez did a great job. And I think when Bashi realized he was really no match for what Christian was bringing him on the feet, tried to get it to the ground as much as possible. But C-Rod is a very good scrambler, very good like defensive and offensive wrestler, was able to get himself out of those positions or even do reversals. So I think that when you consider that, it's a bit worrisome for Austin Bashi, but I think that that's the type of fight for him as a young prospect where he's able to take all of that experience back with him and fix up some of those holes that might have been there in that fight so that he can be better for this next one. So I actually think it could be a blessing in disguise for him. Yannis, on the other hand, strengths for him, 56% of his wins by knockout, and he's a very dynamic striker, a lot of stance switching, so he can very fluidly switch from that orthodox stance to his standard southpaw stance. I believe southpaw is his dominant stance, but he is constantly switching between stances and also able to mix in those strikes from both stances. In his one outing, actually at the end of 2024, he knocked out his opponent cold. Like after hurting him in the first round, dropping him, went out there and for round 2, 9 seconds in, dropped him out cold, head hit the canvas. Very, very technical and very nice looking KO. One thing to call out though, Yannis, not necessarily a fighter who's, always been able to be finished. One of his only fights where he was finished, he actually was subbed by a rear naked choke. And I call that out as a weakness because Austin Bashi actually has several rear naked choke finishes on his record. So when we look at this matchup, you could take that information and think that, okay, this guy's had trouble with that in the past. Austin Bashi has a chance of getting him there. So as I mentioned, and now we're going to jump into the momentum check. Austin Bashi is coming off of one loss. He last fought on January 11, 2025. That loss came by way of, as you already know, Christian Rodriguez. Prior to that, he was undefeated. He had a win over Ramos in Contender Series and then 2 wins, I believe, on the regional scene. The good thing on his record, when I take a look at it and give you a deeper dive, Bashi had quite a few opponents that had very solid records, even though it was the regional scene. It wasn't like he was fighting straight bums his entire time before the UFC. A lot of these guys, like one guy was like 14-3, I believe. So had a lot of professional fights and a lot of wins as well. Yannis is coming off of a 3-fight win streak while he debuts into the UFC. He last fought on May 25th, 2025, and it seemed like he was in a bit of a war there, went to round 4, but was able to get a finish over a previous UFC candidate or representative in Nick Aguirre, I think it's how you say his last name. Got a win there, then he got a win over Jimenez. That's the one where I said Jimenez was knocked out cold. A win over Chapa. Don't know who that is, but it was a KO as well. And before that, a loss to Wanderlei by rear naked choke. Finally, jumping into the intangibles and X factors for Bashi versus Yannis. Neither of these guys are the home fighter, but Austin Bashi does have a lot of pressure here, guys. He had a solid career up until this point before he fought Christian Rodriguez, went out there and got, fraud checked, as a lot of people like to say. He's going to be wanting to go back in there and get a win on his record, get an official win as a UFC fighter, not a Contender Series win. Not to mention, he's also welcoming a debuting fighter. So there's going to be that pressure of, hey, you're the guy here. Let's see if you can stop this new dude from, coming in here and staking his claim in this division. Red flag for Austin Bashi is just, I was not impressed, guys, by his last performance. Now, I do want to say that although it's not like impressing, I think it's based on the fact that he fought C-Rod. C-Rod's a very good fighter, so take that for what it's worth. I don't think a loss to C-Rod necessarily means you're a bad fighter, obviously. I think that C-Rod's very good, very crafty, and like one of those weird cases of this guy who's like just outside the rankings and probably could be ranked, but for whatever reason isn't, and he's been able to knock off a lot of prospects. So keep that in mind. Taking a look at Yannis, not the home fighter, but he also has a lot of pressure coming in. He's the older fighter here at 31. He's going to want to get a statement win against a hot prospect in Austin Bashi. And guys, as I mentioned before, my pick, Austin Bashi. And like I said, Austin Bashi had solid opponents prior to entering the UFC officially. Now, take that for what it's worth. I did put that I'm not super confident in this fight, and that's because Yannis' style is very forward momentum, pressure, switching stances, landing his strikes from both stances, mixing things up very well, which I think could pose issues for Bashi. Yannis also had pretty good takedown defense and also scrambles off the ground. Like when he's gotten taken down, especially in the Jimenez fight, he's able to get back to his feet very quickly. So that's another thing to keep in mind when you're going up against a Bashi who's going to try to keep things on the ground exclusively. Overall, I think Bashi could get a submission here. I don't know how this fight goes to decision and in the favor of Bashi, to be honest with you guys, unless he does like a wet blanket approach. I feel like it's more likely he gets a sub, but like I said, guys, my confidence level on this fight is not very high, 2 out of 5. So take it for what it's worth. All right, jumping into our next fight on the card. Nick Klein versus Andrey Pulyaev. My pick in this fight, and guys, I know I've already said it a million times, the dogs are barking. The dogs are barking this weekend. I have a weird feeling after watching tape, seeing things, I don't know. I feel like Nick Klein could get the win here, and I'm going Nick Klein. I will obviously share the details on why, but I'm picking Klein in this fight, and you will have to see. So looking at their tail of the tape, Nick Klein's 29 years old, 6'1" in height, 77-inch reach with 185 pounds, 6-2 record with an 0-1 record in the UFC. Andrey Pulyaev, on the other hand, 6'4" with a 78.5-inch reach, so just a slight reach advantage on the side of Pulyaev. 9-3 record with an 0-1 record in the UFC as well. Taking a look at these guys' styles. So, when I look at Nick Klein and Pulyaev, I'm looking at Nick Klein has this awkward style on the feet, almost like kind of like a Gerald Meerschaert, like a 2.0 from the orthodox stance. Just very awkward movement and striking style, but somehow it works for him. And what I say by that is when his last fight, even though he got beat by KO against Abdul Malik, he did a good job of like kind of mixing up those attacks, coming from weird angles, landed a solid spinning elbow and actually almost got Malik out of there, which was nutty. But taking a look at his strengths, he's not a striker, guys. He is a grappling and submission artist. He's going to want to try to get his opponent to the ground and control him and look for those submissions. 50% of his wins are by sub. And also, like I said, he has some creative striking and also 0 losses by submission. So not too much of a worry or a threat on the side of him being submitted at this point, especially against Pulyaev, but I could be wrong. Weaknesses for Nick Klein. He is open on the feet a lot. He did get hit with some big shots against Abdul Malik, and actually 100% of his losses are by KO. So the odds are him losing by KO is likely to happen based off the fact he's only lost that way. Pulyaev, on the other hand, he's primarily a striker. 56% of his wins are by KO, 0 losses by submission as well. So keep that in mind. And you might be thinking I'm crazy that I picked Klein. Some weaknesses that I'm going to call out, and this is actually leading into my decision, is I think that Pulyaev seems to have a lot of struggles with the clinch game, especially when he's pushed against the fence against his opponents. Like in his last fight against Leroy Duncan, Duncan was able to really control the fight by clinching up and really holding Pulyaev in that spot for most of the fight, even landing some big shots, almost getting him out of there. I think that he struggles in his defense against the fence, especially in the clinch. And what I worry about in this fight is that I think Nick Klein is going to be a bit bigger. Now, Pulyaev 6'4", he's going to have that that height advantage. But Pulyev's kind of got like a similar build to myself. I'm just as tall, 6'4", but I'm very thin, like very thin build, always have been. I feel like he has that type of build, almost like the type of build where he might be able to drop to welterweight. Maybe not, but Klein seems to have a bit of a thicker build. He did not look like significantly smaller than Abdul Malik, who's a pretty big middleweight. So like, I feel like based on that, Klein's going to have that size advantage that where he could use that physicality to not only get Pulyaev against the cage, but get him to the ground as well and potentially hold him there. Taking a look at the momentum check. So both these men are coming off of a loss. They literally fought 1 month apart. Nick Klein fought on February 22nd, 2025. Pulyaev was March 22nd, 2025. And I have only their last fight for whatever reason, so sorry about that, guys. They both have losses. As I mentioned, Abdul Malik for Nick Klein and Leroy Duncan for Pulyaev. Neither of these fighters are their home fighter in this case. The pressure is on for both of them to get an official win in the UFC. They both came off Contender Series. Both had pretty tough outings in their debut, and now it's time for one of them to come out victorious, hopefully, we don't get a draw, and get that initial first win in the UFC. What I would say as red flags is actually, this is kind of on the both sides, but more so Nick Klein, since he is coming off KO. He did take a lot of damage in his last fight against Abdul Malik. Abdul Malik is one of the heavy hitters of the middleweight division that's not currently ranked. Now, Pulyaev did also get hit and hurt. I think it was at the tail end of his last fight. Like, I think he almost got put out against the cage. So still, both guys had some damage coming into this fight. And ultimately, as I mentioned before, my pick's Nick Klein. And I've already said this could be a very, very wrong pick. So take it for what it's worth, guys. I don't know. I'm feeling risky this week. Feels weird. Something in the air. So the dogs are barking. I'm not feeling super confident, but I think, like I said, when I watch Pulaev's fights, especially Christian Leroy Duncan and his Contender Series fight, he was out physicality against the cage. I don't think out physicality is a word, but I just made that. So against the cage, he didn't seem to do very well, didn't have a lot of answers for his opponents in that regard. And I think that Nick Klein is a type of fighter who could easily use that type of game and then also even maybe chain from the cage into a takedown and getting like top pressure or top control and then looking for submission. So just keep all of that in mind. And then also you mix in the fact that Nick Klein has some very awkward yet creative way of striking that he might be able to also mix that in and land some shots. Not extremely confident though. 2.5 out of 5. And I would say this is either decision or a submission. I don't see Nick Klein KOing Pulyaev. The next fight, guys, and you know what? I might be fucking nuts because when I was doing this, I felt crazy after I made my picks and saw how little amount of people are choosing Tresean Gore, but your boy's going Tresean Gore in this one, baby. Let's go. So I am picking Tresean Gore. You will see why. Let's look at the tail of the tape for these gentlemen. So we've got Rodolfo Vieira, who's 35 years old, 6 foot tall with a 73-inch reach, 10-3 professional record with a 5-3 record in the UFC. Tresean Gore, on the other hand, 31 years old, 6 feet tall, 75-inch reach. He's going to have a 2-inch reach advantage. 5-3 record as a pro, 2-3 in the UFC. Looking at these gentlemen's strengths, Rodolfo Vieira is a seasoned grappler submission artist. He's got 90% of his wins by submission. So he is like, if he's going to win this fight, it's likely by submission. One loss on his record is by guillotine choke. Keep that in mind. Now, taking a look at our boy, Tresean Gore, Ultimate Fighter alum, probably would have went. He was supposed to go to the finale, but he unfortunately got hurt and couldn't do it. And Brian Battle ends up winning. They had their own match in the UFC where Brian Battle came out victorious. So it is what it is. But strengths on the side of Tresean Gore. Very decently balanced fighter. Okay, he's a decently balanced fighter. He's got 60% of his wins by submission, 20% by KO. Great guillotine, especially a great standing guillotine. He has several standing guillotines in the UFC where he just like gets his opponent up against the cage and just cranks that hoe up and just chokes them the fuck out. So Tresean Gore is one of those guys who's not the biggest in the middleweight division, but he has a dominant presence, and also he has like very big strength for his size. Like he doesn't, when you look at him and his physicality, if you will, he's not the most jacked guy, but he's like one of those guys that's got that raw, like might have worked on a farm type strength where it's like a sleeper build almost. Like he's strong as fuck. And you've heard it from his opponents too. What I would say is some weaknesses for Tresean is he's taken a lot of damage, especially in his last fight against Tulio. I rewatched that fight, guys. I don't think enough people give Gore enough credit, even though if you look at the significant strikes, I think he only had 17 and Marco Tulio had like over 100. But he tagged Tulio several times. He landed a left hook on the chin that actually wobbled Tulio in that fight. Like I said, ate a lot of his own damage, but what I liked from Gore in that fight is while he was getting hurt, was still in there ready to scrap. I really liked how he was throwing like a pawing right hand over the top that was like definitely not the most technical, but it was like this, I don't know. I don't mean to sound like this is no disrespect. I watched a street fight once and it was this like tall gay guy. And I know he was tall. I know he was a gay guy because it said like, you know, when a straight guy is like the caption was like when a straight dude is like talking shit, but gets his ass whooped by the gay guy, like, or some shit like that. But the gay guy was like swinging fists like this, and he actually like knocked this dude out with it was like an overhand, like fucking not an overhand like this, like a slap. But like Tresean Gore was using that actually pretty well in his last fight because it was very fast. And I think from a striking perspective, I don't even know how a even technical striker is able to like block that or slip that because it's coming right down. It's almost like an axe kick motion, but with the fist. And then he was also doing like a slap with his lead hand that I thought was working really well in that fight too. That's actually what set up him being able to land a lead hook on the chin of Tulio. So that is what I have to say about their styles. Let's jump into the momentum check. Looking at these gentlemen's momentum, we've got Rodolfo Vieira, 1 loss, and so is Tresean Gore with 1 loss. Vieira last fought on 2/15/2025. He lost to Andrey Petroski. He had a win over Armen Petrosian before that, a win over Cody Brundage before that, and a loss to Chris Curtis before that. So decent strength of schedule there for Rodolfo Vieira. Now looking at Tresean Gore, 1 loss, as I mentioned, last fought 4/12/2025, the Miami card when Volk got his belt back. Lost to Marco Tulio, who's pretty much the new marauder of the middleweight division. Got a win over Antonio Tricoli, which I'm pretty sure is Mackenzie Dern's boo, if I'm not mistaken. He fucking put him in that standing guillotine and sent him home. A win over Josh Friend before that with another standing guillotine as well. A loss to Cody Brundage before that, or as MMA Joey would call him, Cody Bumdage. That fight, though, I feel like Tresean Gore, I was shocked to see him get KO'd by Cody Brundage. I just don't think he had enough respect for the fact that Cody could catch him, and that's what happened. And guys, this game is crazy, as we've seen, right? It can happen to anyone. Looking at the intangibles and X factors for this fight, we've got Rodolfo Vieira, not the home fighter, and neither is Tresean Gore. I would say that Rodolfo Vieira needs a win here. He's 35 years old in the middleweight division. Not the oldest, but definitely needs a win and a competitive performance. He's been caught in a guillotine choke previously and choked out by it. That's a red flag from my end. Looking at Tresean Gore, needs a win or he might get cut because, guys, he has 5-3, 2-3 in the UFC. I really like his fighting style. I think the fact that he continued to stand in there and bang with Tulio after being hurt and actually had some of his own success, even though he had a limited amount of strikes landed. I do think, although he took a lot of damage in his last fight, Rodolfo Vieira is not a fighter that has the most powerful hands where I am like significantly worried for Tresean in this fight. But given the amount of damage he took very recently, and if you guys watch my last week's picks, I did not pick Krylov for that specific reason because of the damage he took. But the difference is that Krylov was actually put out cold and he doesn't really try to mix in any other elements of his game. Tresean, I think, has that physicality where if he gets Vieira against the cage, he might try to throw that standing guillotine in. He's done it before. What I also like is that Tresean Gore throws heavy leg kicks, which Rodolfo Vieira, if you watch his fight against Petrosian, he was having a lot of trouble getting kicked in the leg in that fight, which led to a lot of success on the side of Petrosian. Or I'm sorry, guys. I get Petrosian and Petrosky mixed up. Against Petrosky, he was eating a lot of leg kicks that I feel ended up being very impactful to his overall performance. And with that, guys, I'm going with Tresean Gore, as I already mentioned. I just think that Tresean Gore, I have this weird feeling here. Sometimes you get these gut feelings when you're picking these fights. I feel like this is actually a fight where Tresean could get the W and continue his UFC tenure, but we shall see. Not extremely confident. I think that if Tresean wins, it is going to be by submission or knockout. I don't see him going to decision and getting a win. 3 out of 5 confidence. The next fight on the card, we've got Rinya Nakamura versus Nathan Fletcher. I am going with Nakamura in this fight. I'm not super confident, guys. These fights are so fucking difficult to pick. Looking at these guys, ill of the tape, Nakamura is 30 years old, 5'7", 68.5-inch reach, 9-1 in professional record, 3-1 in the UFC. Fletcher, on the other hand, 27 years old, 5'7", 70-inch reach, 9-2 professional record, 1-1 in the UFC. Nakamura, looking at their styles for this matchup, Nakamura is a good striker, 56% of his wins by KO. I do think a lot of those wins, though, were, if I'm not mistaken, he came up on one of the road to UFC circuits. So take that for what it's worth. Not necessarily wins over the highest level of talent. Weaknesses is that he's been caught in fights. He was actually dropped against Gafarov, so that is something to keep in mind. Strengths on the side of Nathan Fletcher. He's a very good submission artist, trains with Paddy Pimblett. 78% of his wins are by submission. Some weaknesses for him is that he can be overpowered and outstrengthed by opponents. I think we saw that with Karol Lauchrin, who won against him in his last matchup. I think that he was just out-muscled, and Lauchrin was able to really just, take the fight where he wanted to based off of that physicality. I think that he also seems to fall victim to close decision losses, as we saw in his last fight as well. Taking a look at the momentum for these gentlemen. So Nakamura is coming off of a loss, and so is Fletcher. Nakamura fought on January 18, 2025, which was the Islam Makhachev versus Moicano card. He lost to Muin Gafarov. He got a win over Carlos Vieira before that, a win over Fernie Garcia, and a win over Toshiomi, I can't say his last name. And Nathan Fletcher, on the other hand, last fought in London on 3/22/2025, lost to Karol Lauchrin, win over, I don't know what name that is. I can't. It's like something with a Z, but he got a win. A loss to Khan Afli, which was actually an exhibition match, but I included that here because there was another one where he had a decision loss in the UFC Ultimate Fighter season that he was on, and then a win over Don Dooley in I can't remember that European promotion that Paddy Pimblett also came up on. I think it's like FC or something like that. I can't remember what it's called. Comment below what that's called if you guys know. This is a little bonus because if you guys don't comment this below, I just have to assume none of you watch this. Jumping into the intangibles and X factors. So neither of these gentlemen are the home fighter here. I would say both of them, coming off of a loss, need a win. They are going to want to get back into that win column and start building up a streak so that they can see if they're able to get into the rankings. So that is the main course of action for both gentlemen. I don't think either one is in a more pressured position, if you will. Ultimately, guys, I had to go with Nakamura. I'm not super confident here. I went with Nakamura solely off the fact that if you look at his strength of schedule, it just appears to be much better, especially his strength of schedule in the UFC. Now, that's no fault of Nathan Fletcher per se, because he's only had the opportunities he's been given. But when I see that Nakamura's got wins over a couple decent fighters, like Carlos Vieira just got a win, Fernie Garcia, like he has some wins over guys who've also gotten wins or several wins in the UFC. So that's something just to keep in mind. It's not necessarily like the best strength of schedule, but I think it's better than what Nathan Fletcher has up until this point. So that is how I am going. I think Nakamura gets a decision win. 3 out of 5 confidence. Not very confident. The next fight on the card, we've got Danny Silva versus Kevin Vallejos. My pick in this fight, guys, is Kevin Vallejos, and you will see why. Tail the tape. Danny Silva's 28 years old, 5'11", 70-inch reach, 10-1 professional record, 3-0 in the UFC. Vallejos, on the other hand, 23 years old. He's in his Jordan year. Things are looking up. 5'7", 68-inch reach, 15-1 record with a 2-1 record in the UFC. Looking at the styles for this fight, You've got Danny Silva, who has 50% of his wins by knockout, which is solid. So he's a good striker on the feet. Some weaknesses for him. Had some criminally close fights, especially like his last few. I believe he has a couple split decisions that were very close. Now, on the side of Kevin Vallejos, 78% of his wins by KO, and he's finished 13 out of his 15 fights. His only loss in his career is to Gene Silva by decision. I don't even know who the fuck goes to a decision with Gene Silva. That in and of itself is like, this dude should get a trophy for that. Weaknesses that I would say for him, after doing some brief research, is that I think he's just untested against a 5'11" opponent in the UFC. He may have fought someone that's that tall on the regional scene or before getting to the UFC, but in the UFC thus far, I don't think he's fought a very tall opponent where he's going to be fighting Danny Silva is going to have a significant height advantage over him, along with a reach advantage as well. Taking a look at their momentum, and guys, this is exactly why the UFC is goated with some of their matchmaking. Both these guys being in the same division, both fought in March of this year, and they both have a 4-fight win streak. Like, how much better can that get? Now, taking a look at their last 4 fights, Danny Silva fought Almeida, got a win there, I think by decision. He had a very close split decision win over Culibao, a win over Pacheco, and a win over, I can't say that last name. Now looking at Vallejos, win over Duhu Choi, win over Teague on, I think that was Contender Series, a win over Contreras, and a win over Perez before that. So both men coming in with some decent wins here. What was interesting about the Danny Silva fight, I think if you look at the strikes against Culibao actually landed more strikes than him, and really what ended up happening is he won by takedowns, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. I think I remember seeing that. Jumping into the intangibles and X factors. So neither fighter is the home fighter here, but they're both on streaks, and Danny Silva's undefeated. He's going to want to continue being undefeated. Danny Silva's undefeated in the UFC, and he's going to want to continue to be undefeated in the UFC, so he would want to get another win here. Vallejos, on the other hand, also undefeated in his current UFC tenure, if you don't count his loss to Gene Silva on Contender Series. So with that, they're both going to want to keep building on this 4-fight win streak that they've pulled together. Finally, as I mentioned, I'm going Vallejos. I know he's a heavy favorite in this fight. I do just think that his ability to scrap on the feet, but also string together submissions if he needs it, I think that he is going to be maybe too much for Danny Silva in this fight. Like I said, though, Danny Silva is also a very good striker in his own right and could pose problems given that he's got a reach advantage and height advantage over Vallejos. I see Vallejos catching Silva and maybe getting a KO. 3 out of 5 confidence level. All right, guys, jumping into the next fight on the card, we've got Neil Magny, the Haitian sensation, versus Elizeu dos Santos, the guy that KO'd Sean Strickland with a wheel kick back in the day. I'm taking a look at these guys, and before I jump into the tail of the tape, I'm just to let you know I am picking Neil Magny in this fight. Yeah, Magny, let's go. Neil Magny's 37 years old, 6'3", 80-inch reach, 29-13 with a 22-12 record in the UFC. On the side of Dos Santos, 38 years old, turning 39 this December, I believe. 5'11", 73-inch reach, 25-9-1, 11-5 in the UFC. Okay, looking at their styles. So Neil Magny's very well-rounded as an MMA fighter. He's got 59% of his wins by decision, 28% by KO, and 14% by sub. So kind of just a mixed bag of ability when it comes to pulling together a win. I think a huge strength on Neil Magny's side is his strength of schedule. This guy's got wins over Robbie Lawler, Carlos Condit, Mike Malott. Like, he's beat some legends in the welterweight division, especially during a time where those legends were still considered very good, right? Like 2015, 2016 is when he's getting some of these wins. Got that huge win over Mike Malott. Neil Magny's a guy where, you know, if you're not Carlos Prates and you're not Morales, who are just like phenoms when it comes to their game, I think he gives a lot of guys issues because he's a very awkward and weird style, but also very big, very long reach. Some weaknesses for him, though, is he's coming off 2 bad KOs, Michael Morales and Prates back to back. two young, hungry prospects with a lot of power in their hands. Dos Santos now, strengths for him, 60% of his wins by KO. Nickname is Capoeira, so he's going to be doing the spinning shit. He's got very good Capoeira attacks on the feet. I just remember if you guys watch The Ultimate Fighter with Conor McGregor, he had this one fighter that did Capoeira, and he's like, you go, bam, 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 yeah, Capoeira, yes, yes. That's what he said the entire time, and I think that guy ended up getting schooled, which was hilarious, because it's like, Conor was coked the fuck out, but anyways, very dynamic striking for Dos Santos. Weaknesses for him is I think he can be easily out-grappled. And if we're going to compare body types, he struggled quite a bit with Randy Brown, who is like almost the exact same measurements as Neil Magny from a height and reach perspective. 6'3", I think, with an 80-inch or very long reach. So when you look at that he did not do very well with that style. Now, Randy Brown, little bit more dangerous on the feet from a striking perspective, but didn't deal well with that reach disadvantage. And we know Neil Magny is a type to really push his own pace and try to mix things up, which can be very difficult for his opponents to deal with at times. Taking a look at the momentum. So we got Neil Magny coming off of 2 losses, and somehow Neil Magny last fought in November of 2025, as I put here. It was actually November of 2024, but take that for what it is. Lost to Prates, lost to Morales, a win over Mallet, and then a loss to Ian Gary. So what I take away from Neil Magny is not only does some of these losses, they obviously don't age well in his overall legacy, but I guess as current UFC fans, knowing how good Ian Gary, Morales, and Prates all are, Neil Magny being in there and being competitive, well, not really competitive with any of them actually, but being in there with these younger, faster fighters, I think going to Dos Santos in a matchup is actually probably a step down in comp, given that he's gone up against probably the scariest in the welterweight division that the UFC has to offer at this point, in his recent outings. Now, Dos Santos, on the other hand, I can't say as much. Last fought Chidi and Jokowani this year on March 15th. He was KO'd in that fight. And Chidi, very good fighter, but as we know, he is kind of at the tail end, 35 or 36 years old, I believe. So Dos Santos fighting him, and then Zach Scroggins, who, Zach Scroggins, I remember that fight, but I don't really know what he's been able to do that is significant to this point. I lost to Randy Brown before that, and then a draw to Hinat Farakadinov. I guess Dos Santos lucky that they didn't fight in Abu Dhabi, because they would have gave that to Fanat, as we know, or whatever the fuck his name is, man. Renat Farakadinov. Anyway, intangibles and X factors for this. Neither one's a home fighter. They both need wins. A fun stat here, Neil Magny's never had 3 losses in a row in his career. So if he is to lose this fight, it'd be the first time that he has a 3-fight losing streak. In his career, he's had several 2-fight losing streaks. Generally would, lose one and win one. Maybe lose 2, then win several. Never had a 3-fight losing streak. So that is what is at stake here for him. And then on the side of Dos Santos, I would say there's not as much pressure since he did just have a win before he lost his last one. But I think he needs to be competitive here at the very least, given that he is the older fighter and definitely coming out of his prime at this point as a 38-year-old turning 39 in December. Ultimately, guys, I went with Neil Magny, as I said. I think that he just has had more high-level competition, had more 5-round experience. And even though that doesn't necessarily matter here, I just think that's overall miles in the cage. I could see Neil Magny using some craftiness here to pull off a decision. Not extremely confident, though, given that he's just been KO'd a couple times. 2 out of 5 is my feeling. But he could also maybe get a submission, which I only feel that way because Neil has this way of I don't know. I feel like he's this this type of fighter where it's doesn't have a shit ton of submissions on his record, but I feel like I remember him submitting a lot of people out. As weird as that sounds. The next fight, guys, we've got Karol Rosa, Nora Cornolle. This is the people's main event, as a lot of people might say. 30 years old for Karol Rosa. Wait. I am picking Nora Cornolle in this fight. Now, this is another one where I just don't feel so confident about it. Anyways, Karol Rosa's 30 years old, 5'5", 67.5-inch reach, 18-7 professional record, 7-4 in the UFC. Nora Cornolle, on the other hand, 35 years old, 5'7", 67-inch reach, 9-2 record with a 3-1 record in the UFC. So, looking at these women's strengths, we've got Karol Rosa, very well-rounded, I'd say. 67% of her wins are by decision. A little bit of a submission threat there as well. Ultimately, though, most of her fights go to decision. That's really the only thing to write home about there. I think some strengths for Nora Cornolle. She's a great striker. 67% of her wins are by KO. I feel like Nora Cornolle is the type of fighter that's more of like a marauder in this division. Looks to hurt and damage her opponents. Karol Rosa, though, has also had some great scraps of a contender for fight of the year with Irene Aldana at what fucking event was that? UFC 296. I actually was there live. It was really cool. Taking a look at these women's momentum. So Karol Rosa's coming off of a loss. Cornolle's coming off of a win. Rosa last fought on January 18, 2025. She lost to Perez. She had a win over Kinziad before that, a loss to Aldana before that, a win over Santos before that. And then looking at Cornolle, coming off of a one-fight win streak here. Last fought on the Miami card, 4/12/2025. Won over Haley Cowan. Lost to Cavalcanti in a split decision before that. A win over Melissa Mullins, who's actually decent. And then a win over Edwards before that. Intangibles and X factors in this fight. So neither fighter's the home fighter. They're not. Rosa doesn't have too much pressure. She's going to want to bounce back, get a win. Cornolle is, I think the only pressure for her is to continue building a win streak here. But like I said, not the home fighter. Ultimately, guys, I went Nora Cornolle. I just think Nora Cornolle is the more brutal fighter, if you will. I think she is going to be looking for a finish more than Rosa will, just based off of, even if you look at their statistics, Cornolle is more inclined to get a finish, but I think Cornolle's style is very striking heavy, and she's going to want to get, land those paws, maybe land a couple kicks, some knees up the middle as well. Rosa, on the other hand, just don't think she has that mixed bag. She's probably going to be more one-dimensional, looking to get takedowns. Although she did have some good scraps, she's taken a lot of damage as well. I think Cornolle has some good wins in the UFC. I think if Cornolle could use her clinch skills too, getting some knees in there, elbows, I think that she has the opportunity to go to decision as a way of winning this fight. 3 out of 5 confidence. Not so confident, guys. This is a very low confidence card for me. Jumping into the next fight, we've got Elves Brener versus Esteban Ribovics. I am picking Esteban Ribovics in this fight. You guys will see why. So looking at Elves Brener, 27 years old, 5'10" with a 72-inch reach, 16-5 record, 3-2 record in the UFC. Ribovics is 29 years old, 5'10" tall, 69-inch reach, 14-2 record, 3-2 record in the UFC. Looking at these gentlemen's styles, so Elves Brener, 69% of his wins by sub. He actually trains out of shoot to box with Diego Lima, so he's got that grappling and submission threat. Some weaknesses, though, is that he's coming off of a KO from a taller striker in Alvarez, who he just fought. And looking at the side of Esteban Ribovics, 50% of his wins by KO, 36% of his wins by submission. More dynamic finisher, in my opinion. He's also never been finished in his career. He's only coming off of a loss, but it was a split decision loss to Hakparas. Very great scrap that these two had. Took a lot of damage, but I would also say some weaknesses. Not the worst weakness, but Ribovics only has a 63% takedown defense, which means he is prone to being taken to the ground. Jumping in to the momentum. So Elves Brener coming off of 2 losses. He last fought on August 3rd, 2024. He lost to Alvarez in that fight. Before that, lost to Mincy Betts Olerbai, or Mitty Beck. I like to call him Mincy Betts. Won over Kenan Ko, and then a win over Kutaladze, which was a comeback finish for him with great win on his record. Now, looking at Ribovics, coming off of a loss to Hakparas, last fought March 1st, 2025, so a little bit more active here. He also has a win over Zellhuber at the Sphere before that. A knockout win over McKinney. He made McKinney smile on the ground, he was just like that against the cage. And a win over Cam I don't even know who that is. It looks like a female's name. Sorry. Kamala. It's Kamala. Intangibles and X factors. So Neither fighter's the home fighter. I think both of them are going to want to get a win. They're going to want to bounce back into the win column, especially more pressure on Elves Brener, given that he is on a 2-fight skid at the moment. He got KO'd in his last outing. So that's a red flag I called out, and some variables. Like I said, he trained to shoot the box, so take that for what it's worth. Looking at Esteban Ribovics, he's going to want to come back into the win column. He had a very close fight in his last outing. He had that close fight, but he also took a lot of damage there. So take that for what it's worth as well. But as I already said, going Esteban Ribovics, I think he's the more dangerous fighter when it comes to the striking game. And I think he can handle himself on the ground as well if he needs to. I could see this being a decision or KO, and I'm actually very confident that this one is going to be done by Ribovics, 4 out of 5 confidence. The next fight on the card, and you guys might think I'm fucking nuts, but I'm going in this fight between Mateusz Rebecki and Chris Duncan. I am choosing Chris Duncan because I have not chosen Chris Duncan in the past, and it's bit me in the ass. Jumping in the tail of the tape, this is some prime UFC matchmaking. Somehow these two are like the exact same in certain ways, right? So you got Mateusz Rebecki, who's 32 years old, 5'7", 66-inch reach, 20-2 record with 4-1 in the UFC. Now, Chris Duncan, his adversary here, also 32 years old, 5'10", so he's a little bit taller, 71.5-inch reach, longer reach as well. 13-2 record, only 2 losses overall, 4-1 in the UFC. So the fact that these are both 32, both 4-1 in the UFC, it's like somehow they just know to match those types of fights up. Looking at the styles for this fight, so Rebecki's got that dog in him, you know, he's been in a couple really good scraps and just been able to grit down. He's got that Polish dog in him, which I fuck with the Polacks, man. Great people. Very, very good at fighting as well, especially like you look at Jan Blachowicz, you look at Martin Budaj, I think Martin Budaj is Polish, I think. Anyway, 45% of his wins are by KO, 35% of his wins are by submission. Some weaknesses for Rebecki is that he's just very open on the feet, gets hit a lot, and he's taken so much damage. I mean, his last outing before Mincy Betts, he got beat, got KO'd, took so much damage in that fight. And when he fought Mincy Betts, he had a shit ton of damage as well. So I think that is really what leaned heavily into my decision here, guys. Because when I look at Chris Duncan, he's got a great all-around game. He has lost in UFC, obviously, to Manel Torres, who's we know is very strong, got great striking. But looking at Chris Duncan, 54% of his wins are by KO, 23% are by sub. I would say some weaknesses for him is that he's just open on the feet. So take that for what it's worth. Looking at their momentum. So Rebecki's coming off of a 1-fight win over Mincy Betts. Now, Chris Duncan's got 2-fight win streak. Rebecki last fought 10-26, 2024, which I think was UFC 308. Yeah, UFC 308. He had a win over Orobai. He had a loss before that to Diego Ferreira, who's I think fighting on the Chicago card, if I'm not mistaken. And then a couple wins before that, one of those being over Roosevelt Roberts, not the best win if you're looking at the historical aspect of that. It went over Radzhabov, which was a good win because Radzhabov, I think, was 17-4 when he got that KO over him I think it was in 2020. Chris Duncan, on the other hand, last fought March 22nd, 2025, a win over Jordan, a win over Balagioki before that, a loss to Manel Torres before that, and a win over Ashmuz before that. Jumping into the intangibles and X factors, neither one's a home fighter. Really, they're just going to want to keep building their wins, guys. Like, that's the pressure here, is to build a win streak. Nothing outside of that, though. I feel like either one of these guys could lose and still be in the good graces of the UFC and still have a lot of opportunities to come after this. Ultimately, I chose Chris Duncan, as I mentioned. I think Chris Duncan just got more tools to finish this, and I don't like the amount of damage Rebecki's taken in his last fights. I think Chris Duncan, being the bigger fighter as well, is going to have an advantage there. These guys have trained at American Top Team together, so they probably know each other pretty well. Ultimately, I think Duncan might get a decision or maybe a sub. 3 out of 5 confidence. Jumping into what is now the main event of the evening for August 2nd, we've got Tatsuro Taira versus Hyun Sung Park. So in this fight, guys, I got to pick Tatsuro Taira. Although, feels really weird. I see this maybe being another Laura Sanko moment. Oh my God! Oh my God! We got Park Hyun Sung! I don't think she's actually, I don't even know if she's commentating. Sorry. Anyways, Tatsuro Taira is 25 years old, 5'7", with a 70-inch reach. He is 15-1 in his overall professional record, 6-1 in the UFC. Park Hyun Sung, 29 years old, 5'7", 66-inch reach, 10-0 professional record, 3-0 in the UFC. Looking at their styles, so I would say both men have a very well-balanced game. I would say Tatsuro Taira, very well-balanced, 44% of his wins by submission, 31% are by knockout. What some weaknesses for Tatsuro Taira, did not do that well in his last fight, especially when he was not able to take control of the fight from a grappling perspective. I feel like when he wasn't able to get takedowns against Brandon Royval, there was a bit of frustration, and you could almost see him like wilting and quitting in the octagon. During that, he did grind it out, ended up losing split decision, but I feel like it was a clear decision for that of Brandon Royval, in my opinion. Now, Park Hyun Sung on the other side, very well balanced as well. 50% of his wins by sub, 40% of his wins by KO. So just a bit better in the percentages there. However, he does have less fights overall. Weaknesses is that he's untested against a skilled or elite opposition in the UFC. Like, really hasn't gotten like great wins over high level guys yet in the UFC. Jumping into the momentum check. So you got Tatsuro Taira coming off of a loss, and you got Sung coming in with a 10-fight win streak. Now, Tatsuro Taira last fought October 12th, 2024, lost to Royval. Before that, he had a win over Alex Perez, who's a ranked flyweight. Before that, a win over Hernandez, who's also a ranked flyweight. And then a win over Chairez before that. So solid wins that he's put together during his tenure at the UFC, especially going 5 rounds with Royval, who's a dog in there, that raw dog. Now, looking at Sung, 10-fight win streak. He last fought on May 17, 2025, and the fight ended almost as fast as it started. A win over Hernandez there, a win over Ross before that, a win over Choi before that, and a win over Ki Wan, I think. But those fighters are not high-level fighters in the UFC, obviously. Intangibles and X factors. So neither one's a home fighter. I do think the pressure is going to be on Tatsuro Taira. Park Hyun Sung had a matchup with Steve Ursag. He's stepping in at short notice here. Not the craziest of short notice, because he did have a fight next week booked, or the week after, I think. Whatever the case is, you have Tatsuro Taira is going to want to get a fight here, or he's going to want to win this fight here because he just got his first professional loss in his last fight. Going to want to bounce back and erase that from everyone's memories. A red flag to call out for Tatsuro Taira, and this is where I might be feeling that Laura Senko type commentating, is that Tatsuro Taira had a camp for a pretty dominant wrestling style against Albazi, and now he's getting Park Hyun Sung, who's a very well balanced, not as much of a like one-dimensional type fighter. So I don't know how much Tatsuro Taira trains striking and things of that nature, but could have some issues in the striking realm if he wasn't, planning on fighting a striker for this fight. He could be totally fine though. Sung on the other side, also a ton of pressure. He is coming short notice, so not necessarily pressure there, but he's going to have that pressure to stay undefeated in this matchup. What I would also say here, Hyun Sung was training for Steve Ursag, who is very striking heavy. And so you have to think Park Hyun Sung is probably going out there with his guns blazing from a striking perspective. So Tatsuro Taira could have that advantage in the grappling department, especially if Hyun Sung was not really practicing or anticipating a grappling heavily approach from Steven Ursag. Ultimately, guys, as I said, I gotta go Tatsuro Taira here. I just think Tatsuro Taira has had the better strength of schedule to this point, but the writing is on the wall for Park Hyun Sung to go out there and maybe get a win, given that he's probably trained more of that striking in this camp to that of Tatsuro Taira. And really what it boils down to is who can deploy their game plan or their specified skill they were training for better in this matchup. Guys, I just want to say thank you so much if you tuned into this. I know that some of these can be long. I truly appreciate any of you who come here and watch this content. I'm making this content for you guys as MMA fans. I'm a huge MMA fan myself, so I truly hope if you aren't subscribed that you consider subscribing to Fight Feed so you can stay on top of not only my prediction videos, but my pick tracker and all the other content that I post that is related to MMA and UFC. Thank you guys so much again. Make sure to give this a like if you enjoyed. Comment your parlays, your picks. I want to see who you guys are picking this week, and pray that some of these crazy underdog picks will hit for me. I really want to get the big win in our pick tracker, so that is my goal. Thank you guys again. I'll see you in the next one.